Welcome to another edition of Easy English Talk, where you can improve your confidence in speaking English and sound more natural by listening to a conversation. In this episode, we will follow a discussion of project planning from start to completion. So get ready, and let's dive in.
All right, Evelyn, before we dive into anything else, let's define the project scope. What exactly are we aiming to deliver by the end of this?
That's a great place to start. The main objective is to create a new customer-facing dashboard. We need something that delivers real-time analytics but also keeps it simple enough for non-technical users. The goal is to make it intuitive.
I like that. Keeping it user-friendly should be a priority. Do you think we should focus purely on analytics first? Or should we try to add some interactive features like customizable reports?
We could introduce customization later, but I think the core should be robust analytics, data visualizations, performance metrics, and perhaps some basic user insights. Adding customization could complicate things initially, so maybe we hold off until phase 2.
Fair point. So we'll define the core features as analytics dashboards, key metrics, and perhaps a user insight section. But no customizations yet, right?
Exactly. Once we have the basics in place, we can expand. Another thing to consider, do we want the data to be pulled from multiple sources or just one?
Good question. Multiple sources could add complexity, but could provide a more holistic view for the end users. Maybe we should start with one source for now and expand as we build confidence in the product.
That makes sense. We'll make sure we have flexibility built into the system for future expansions. How about timelines? Are we looking to launch this in phases or do we want a full rollout at the end?
I think we should go with a phased approach. This way, we can gather early feedback and refine it before full deployment. For example, once we have a prototype, we can present it to a small group for testing and get feedback before releasing it to a wider audience.
Agreed. That will help us identify any usability issues early on. I'll get started on drafting the features list, but let's keep the scope tight for phase 1, no distractions.
Sounds good. Once we have that, we can go over the requirements in detail. We should also consider potential user roles like admin and user levels and how permissions will be managed.
Right, user roles are essential. Let me also check in with the customer team to see if there are any additional requirements we might have missed. Better to clarify now.
Great. I'll make sure we're aligned on those requirements as soon as you get that feedback. Once we finalize this scope, I think we'll have a solid foundation to work from.
Absolutely. Let's aim for simplicity in phase 1, then we can tackle more complex features down the road.
All right, Evelyn, let's dive into setting the project goals and objectives. It's the foundation for everything we'll do moving forward, so it's crucial we get this right.
Absolutely. If we don't have clear goals, it's easy for things to get off track. The whole project can end up feeling scattered, and it becomes harder to measure success.
Exactly. The first thing we need to establish is a SMART goal framework. We should make sure the goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Let's start with the specific part. Do we have a clear, concise goal for this project?
I think we do. Our objective is to develop a mobile app for our client that enhances user engagement with their brand through personalized content. But we need to break that down further to make sure everyone on the team knows exactly what they're working towards.
Right. So if we're being more specific, we could break that down into things like user signups or app performance targets. We also need to clarify the app's primary functions. Will it have a content feed? Will there be a social component? We need those details early on.
Agreed. The more specific we can be about what this app needs to do, the easier it will be to evaluate the success later. For example, what kind of personalized content are we aiming for? Are we using AI to recommend articles, or is it based on user preferences? That's something we need to decide from the get-go.
Good point. The next element is making sure the goal is measurable. We need to define what success looks like and how we're going to track it. For instance, should we aim for a specific number of downloads or active users within 6 months of launch?
Definitely. I think it would be helpful to set up some KPIs around user acquisition, user retention, and engagement. Maybe we target a 25% increase in daily active users after 3 months. But it's also important to track the app's performance. Does it load quickly? Is it bug-free? Or are there crashes that need attention?
That's a great idea. The performance metrics are crucial too. I'd say we need a team responsible for quality assurance who can track these issues and work out any technical challenges before launch.
Absolutely. And when we talk about being achievable, we also need to assess whether the resources and time we have will allow us to meet these goals. Sometimes we have ambitious goals, but if we don't have the right team or technology in place, they could end up being unrealistic.
That's where resource planning comes in. We need to understand the team's current capacity and any constraints. If we aim for a complex app, but we don't have the developers or designers to do it, we might need to scale back or adjust the timeline. So this goal needs to align with our available resources.
Right, and we should set up a timeline for the whole project, including major milestones. That will give us a clearer view of the target dates. And speaking of time, we can't forget the timeline for user feedback either.
Definitely. Gathering user feedback early in the development process will allow us to tweak the app before it's too late. I'm thinking we should do beta testing about halfway through the development cycle to identify any major issues.
That's a good strategy. But we also need to ensure the timelines we set are realistic. If we're going to do the beta test in 3 months, then we need to have the core features working by that point. We should set a schedule for our milestones with the same consideration.
Agreed. So we need to take into account the internal deadlines, such as design drafts, user testing rounds, and back-end integration, and make sure these all line up with the overall project timeline. That way, we'll stay on track and can manage any delays effectively.
Right. And to make sure we're setting relevant goals, let's consider the bigger picture. What does the client really want? Is the goal to increase engagement through the app? Or is there a specific monetary target they're looking to hit with user subscriptions? Understanding this will help us align the project objectives with their business goals.
I agree. The relevant aspect of the SMART goals is all about ensuring the project contributes to the larger vision. We also need to align with the target audience's needs. If we're not clear about who the app is for, we could end up wasting time and resources on features that the users don't care about.
That's why we need to nail down the user personas early in the process. We can build out detailed profiles of the primary audience segments and ensure the features we develop match their preferences. Are they tech-savvy? Do they prefer simple interfaces? This needs to be part of our goal-setting phase.
Exactly. And once we have those personas, we should refer back to them throughout development to keep the project focused. We'll also need a clear system for prioritizing features. For instance, if a feature isn't aligned with the core objectives, it should be deferred until after launch, not integrated into the initial scope.
Right. And that brings us to the final aspect of SMART goals, being time-bound. Having deadlines for each of the major phases will keep us accountable. But we need to build in buffer time for unexpected delays. There's always something that comes up, whether it's a technical issue or feedback that requires extra time to address.
For sure. Building flexibility into the timeline is key. But we also need to ensure the key dates, like the launch date, are non-negotiable. So we'll focus on setting deadlines that allow for flexibility, but keep the launch on track.
Right. We should also communicate those deadlines to all stakeholders from the beginning. If everyone understands the key milestones and the timeline, it's easier to adjust expectations as things progress.
I think that brings us to the final piece, aligning everyone on the project team with the goals. We need to make sure that each team member knows what their role is in achieving these objectives. They should understand how their work contributes to the overall success.
That's absolutely crucial. If the team members don't see how their tasks align with the bigger picture, it can lead to a lack of motivation or confusion. Having clear goals and regularly checking in on progress will ensure that everyone stays on the same page.
I'll set up a kickoff meeting to present these goals to the team, and we'll do follow-ups at key points during the project. That way, we can adjust quickly if something goes off course, but also keep the momentum going.
Sounds good. I think with these clear, smart goals in place, we'll have a solid foundation to guide the project forward. It'll give us a framework to measure success and adapt as needed.
Exactly. It's all about setting the right goals from the start so we can stay focused, aligned, and on track throughout the entire project. Let's make sure to document everything clearly and communicate it to all stakeholders. Let's talk about the budget. Do we have any flexibility with how we allocate funds for development versus design?
Total budget is capped at $50,000, and while there's some flexibility, we need to be mindful of keeping the balance between development and design. I think the bulk of the budget will go toward the development team, especially with the data integration piece.
I agree. But we'll also need to allocate some budget for external design work. Do you think outsourcing is a good option, or should we stick with our in-house team?
Given the timeline and the complexity of the dashboard, I think outsourcing could help us stay on track. We've worked with a design firm in the past, and they delivered high-quality work within our budget. They understand our requirements well.
That sounds good. I'll get quotes from the design firm and compare them with in-house estimates. As for development, do you think we need additional developers, or is the current team sufficient?
We should be okay with the current team, but we might need to bring in a specialist for data integration. I'll reach out to the IT department to see if they can help out.
All right. Let's also look into the cost of any necessary software tools. We'll likely need a project management tool and possibly a new tool for visualizing the data. Do you have any suggestions?
We've used Trello in the past for project management, but I think we might need something more robust this time, like Asana or Jira. For data visualization, I've heard good things about Tableau, though it can be pricey.
Let's get quotes for both and see which fits better into the budget. I'll also check if there's any overlap with existing tools we have in place.
Sounds like a plan. Once we have those numbers, I'll update the resource allocation and make sure we're not overcommitting anywhere.
So let's move on to resource allocation. This is one of the most crucial aspects of the project. If we don't allocate resources properly, we could face delays, overspending, or burnout among the team.
Absolutely. It's about balancing the right skills with the right tasks. If we don't have the right people in place for key tasks, or if we overwork our team, it'll hurt the project in the long run.
Exactly. So, to start, we need to clearly define what resources we need. Let's talk about human resources first. Who do we need on the team, and do we have all the roles covered?
Well, for this project, we're going to need a project manager, developers, designers, QA testers, and probably a UX/UI specialist. We also need to think about the back-end infrastructure. Do we have a team member who specializes in that?
I think we have a couple of developers who can handle the back end, but we may need an additional cloud architect for the scalability aspect. Do you think we need any external resources or contractors for any specific expertise?
That's a good point. If we're targeting a mobile-first app, we might need an expert in mobile performance optimization. Maybe bringing in a freelancer for that will help get us ahead in terms of speed and quality.
I agree. Bringing in specialized skills on a temporary basis can often be more cost-effective than training an in-house team member. What about the design side of things? We might need a dedicated graphic designer or a UI specialist to help create high-quality assets.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. Having someone dedicated to the design will help ensure we don't overburden our team with too many tasks at once. Plus, it'll speed up the process and improve the overall quality.
Okay, so we have a clearer idea of the human resources we need. Now, let's talk about the budget. Do we have a realistic budget for this team setup?
We should be able to make it work with the budget we have. But we need to be careful with how we allocate the funds. We can't afford to overspend in the early stages and run out of money for the testing phase, for example.
I think it's important to prioritize spending on critical resources. For example, we can't cut corners on development or design, but maybe we could use internal resources for some of the non-critical tasks like admin work or minor documentation.
That's a good strategy. We could also look at using tools that will help us streamline the process and save costs like project management software or design templates. That would reduce the workload on our designers and developers.
Exactly. We should aim to make smart investments in tools and software that provide the most value. For example, using a collaboration platform like Slack or Asana can reduce overhead and make communication more efficient, which in turn saves time and money.
And we also need to be aware of how we're allocating our team's time. It's not just about having the right skills, it's about making sure the team isn't stretched too thin. We can't afford to have team members working on multiple projects at once, or they'll burn out.
Right. So we need to make sure we have clear expectations and roles from the start. The more focused people are on specific tasks, the higher the quality of work. We should also have regular check-ins to track workloads and make adjustments if anyone seems overwhelmed.
I think one of the key things with resource allocation is having flexibility. Even if we allocate a resource to a task, things can change. If we hit an unexpected obstacle, we might need to reallocate a developer or designer to a different task, or we may need more resources in a particular area.
That's true. So we need to build in contingency planning. For instance, if a developer is delayed due to technical issues, we should have backup tasks ready that other team members can pick up if necessary. It's about having options to adapt quickly.
And we shouldn't forget about the importance of team morale. If we notice someone is getting overloaded or unhappy with their workload, we need to step in and either redistribute tasks or provide support. Burnout will be a big issue if we're not mindful of this.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's not just about getting the work done. It's about maintaining a healthy, sustainable work environment. Maybe we can introduce a workload management tool to give us visibility into each team member's capacity, so we can avoid overloading anyone.
Yes, that could be really helpful. I also think regular one-on-one check-ins will help us stay on top of any issues before they become bigger problems. Gives people a chance to express any concerns they might not bring up in group meetings.
That's a great approach. We'll need to implement something like a weekly stand-up meeting where we can get an overview of how everyone's progressing and identify any resource shortages or bottlenecks. This way, we can solve problems before they escalate.
Another thing we need to consider is training. If we find that a resource gap is due to a lack of skills, we can invest in some training for the team. That could help avoid delays and improve overall performance. For example, if a developer is struggling with a certain tech stack, maybe a short course could get them up to speed.
Training is a great investment. We want our team to feel confident and capable, especially when it comes to new technologies. It's also important to allocate time for this learning, so it doesn't impact the project timeline too severely.
Speaking of timelines, we also need to account for resource availability. For example, if someone on the team has limited availability, we need to either bring in another person or adjust the schedule accordingly.
That's crucial. We'll need to have a clear understanding of each team member's availability, whether they're working part-time, on other projects, or have personal commitments. We need this information up front so we can make informed decisions about resource allocation.
Another aspect to consider is whether we have the right equipment or software to support the team. Sometimes you don't realize you need extra hardware or licenses until you're deep into the project. Are we covered in terms of tools?
I think so, but I'll double-check. For instance, if we need additional licenses for design software or cloud storage for testing, we need to ensure that's part of the budget. I'll review everything to make sure we're set up for success.
Perfect. And lastly, we should plan for any potential resource bottlenecks. For example, if a particular task is highly dependent on one person or resource, we need to have a backup plan in case that person is unavailable.
I couldn't agree more. Let's go ahead and create a risk mitigation plan that includes backup resources. That will help us avoid major disruptions if something unexpected happens.
Sounds good. With the right resource allocation in place, we can ensure that the project runs smoothly and stays on track. It's all about being proactive and having a solid backup plan.
Exactly. I'll set up a resource allocation plan and make sure that we have everything we need in place. We can also schedule regular resource reviews to ensure we're staying on track. All right, Evelyn, let's talk team roles. Who should be responsible for leading the design work?
Sarah would be ideal for that role. She's worked on similar projects and has a good understanding of both the technical requirements and user experience.
Great. And for development, do you think Mark should take the lead?
Yes, I think Mark is perfect for this. He's already familiar with our systems, so he can hit the ground running.
I'll make sure he has the support he needs. For testing, we'll need someone to coordinate that. I'm thinking you should take the lead on testing.
I'm happy to do that. I'll work closely with the QA team to create a testing plan, and we'll make sure we cover every aspect of functionality and performance.
Perfect. As for communication, I'll take the lead on stakeholder updates and project status reports. I'll also coordinate with external teams like the design firm and IT.
Sounds good. I'll keep you in the loop on testing progress, and we can both monitor the overall project timeline to make sure everything stays on track.
I'll send out a document with these roles and responsibilities so everyone knows their areas of focus. Let's also plan for regular check-ins so we can address any concerns or issues that arise. Evelyn, we need to make sure we're keeping stakeholders in the loop. How often should we update them on progress?
I think bi-weekly updates are a good starting point. We can include key milestones, budget status, and any potential risks.
That works for me. Do you think we should also schedule a formal review with them after each milestone?
Yes, we can set up formal reviews after each phase. We can show them the work we've done, get feedback, and make any necessary adjustments.
Perfect. We'll keep the updates short and to the point, focusing on what's important. Do you think we should invite them to the internal reviews?
For the prototype review, I think it could be helpful. They'll get a sense of where we are, and we can gather their input early.
Great. I'll draft an email with a proposed schedule and send it out to them for approval. Let's also make sure we're keeping communication clear with the customer team, especially if we run into any issues.
Agreed. I'll update the communication plan and ensure everyone knows when and how they'll be updated.
Now that we've got the project plan in motion, it's time to talk about monitoring and adjustments. It's crucial that we don't just set the plan and forget it. We need to continuously monitor progress and be ready to make adjustments when things change.
Absolutely. No project ever goes exactly as planned. There will be unexpected delays, resource constraints, and maybe even changes in scope. The ability to adapt is what makes a project successful in the end.
Exactly. So, the first thing we need to establish is how we're going to monitor progress. We can't adjust if we don't have clear data on where we stand. What tools or methods do you think we should use to track our project's performance?
I think it's essential to use a combination of project management tools and regular team check-ins. Something like Asana or Trello can help us track tasks and milestones, but we also need to have a human element with our team meetings. A blend of both will give us the best visibility.
I agree. Digital tools like Asana will give us a clear view of the tasks and timelines, but we also need those regular meetings to address any issues that might not be apparent just from task completion rates. A weekly status meeting could be a good way to touch base and assess if things are on track.
Yes, and during those meetings, we should focus on both what's going well and where we're encountering challenges. It's not just about ticking off tasks on a list, but also discussing blockers or areas where resources are getting stretched.
Exactly. Sometimes a task might be marked as done on the project management tool, but if there were issues along the way, we won't know until we check in with the team. I also think it would be useful to introduce weekly performance dashboards that summarize key metrics like task completion rates, budget status, and any delays.
I love that idea. A dashboard can help everyone stay informed, especially stakeholders who might not be involved in day-to-day activities. If we can give them a snapshot of progress every week, it'll keep them aligned and reduce the need for constant updates.
Agreed. We also need to track more than just task completion. Things like team morale and the quality of the work matter too. If the team is working long hours but the quality isn't up to standard, that's something we need to adjust. Quality metrics should be just as important as deadlines.
Yes, and we can track this through feedback loops. For example, we could implement regular quality reviews or sprint reviews where the team presents their work. This will allow us to catch any quality issues early on and adjust before it becomes a bigger problem.
That's a smart approach. We should also incorporate a retrospective at the end of each sprint, where we evaluate the last cycle of work. What went well? What could be improved? That'll help us continuously improve how we're executing the plan.
I agree. Those retrospectives will provide insight into how we can adjust our processes too. If we notice recurring issues in how tasks are handled or challenges with communication, we can adjust the workflow or tools we're using to support the team better.
Exactly. Another thing I've been thinking about is how we'll handle scope creep. It's easy for the project to start expanding once we're deep into development, so we need a system in place for managing changes to the scope. Should we only approve scope changes during the weekly meeting?
That's a good question. I think it's important to have a formal change request process. If someone suggests a change, we should evaluate the impact on the timeline, budget, and resources before we approve it. We can discuss it in the weekly meeting, but only after we've assessed whether it's necessary for the success of the project.
I think we should also set up a clear approval chain for scope changes. For example, a small change could be approved by you and me, but larger changes would need to go through stakeholders. That way, we maintain control over the project's direction and don't end up with a moving target.
Definitely. Keeping scope creep in check is key. Another area we need to monitor is the project's budget. It's easy to go over budget if we're not constantly checking on expenses, especially when unexpected issues arise.
Right. To avoid this, I think we should schedule budget reviews at key points in the project. Maybe after the first milestone, we can do a deep dive into where we stand with costs and adjust accordingly. This will give us a chance to catch any financial issues early on.
That's smart. And if we do end up going over budget in a certain area, we should have a discussion about prioritization. What can we cut and what's absolutely necessary to keep the project moving forward?
Exactly. Another important thing to monitor is stakeholder engagement. If the client or other stakeholders aren't involved enough, we might miss out on important feedback or risk misaligning with their expectations. Regular communication is crucial to keeping them engaged.
We could set up bi-weekly check-ins with key stakeholders. This would be an opportunity to provide updates and gather feedback. If there's any misalignment or concerns from their side, we can address them immediately instead of waiting until the end of the project.
That's a great idea. But it's not just about formal meetings. We should also keep the communication lines open for ad hoc check-ins if something urgent comes up. A quick call or email can sometimes solve problems faster than waiting for the next scheduled meeting.
Agreed. Flexibility in communication will help us stay on top of things. Now back to adjusting the project plan itself. How do you feel about having a plan B or contingency plans for critical parts of the project?
I think it's essential. We need to identify high-risk areas early on, whether it's key dependencies, critical deadlines, or a particular resource, and develop contingency plans. That way, if something doesn't go as expected, we're not scrambling to come up with a solution.
Exactly. For example, if a key developer has to take time off unexpectedly, we should have a backup plan for how to handle that. Maybe there's another team member who can pick up the slack or an external contractor who can step in temporarily.
Right, and for the timeline, if we're falling behind on a certain milestone, we might need to adjust future deadlines or reassign resources to catch up. It's all about being flexible and staying ahead of any potential problems.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have regular monitoring. The earlier we can spot a potential problem, the better we can adjust. We don't want to wait until a delay has snowballed into something much bigger.
Exactly. We also need to keep an eye on the team's well-being. If we notice signs of stress or burnout, we need to be able to adjust workload distribution or even bring in extra resources if necessary. A happy and healthy team is far more productive.
Absolutely. I think regular check-ins, not just about tasks but about how the team is feeling, will give us insights into any issues before they become major problems.
We're on the same page. Monitoring progress isn't just about the technical side of things, but also about the team's morale and overall project health. If we can keep everything in balance, we'll be able to make adjustments without losing momentum.
And finally, we need to be prepared to make larger adjustments if necessary. Sometimes the project will shift direction. Maybe a new priority comes up or the client decides they want something different. We need to be flexible enough to pivot when required.
Exactly. But anytime we make a big change, we need to reassess the project's goals, timeline, and resources to make sure we're still on track. It might even require recommunicating with stakeholders to align on the new direction.
Right. Keeping everything aligned through communication and flexibility will ensure we stay on course, even when things inevitably change.
All right? I think we've covered a lot of ground on this. Let's make sure we have a robust monitoring system in place, along with contingency plans for those critical areas.
Sounds good. We've got this.
Now, Evelyn, let's talk about managing changes. Every project has its twists and turns, and we need a solid plan for handling changes without throwing everything off track.
Absolutely. The biggest challenge here is scope creep. If the client or the team keeps introducing new features or changes after we've set the foundation, it could disrupt timelines and budgets.
Exactly. So, I think we need a formal change request process in place. Whenever someone proposes a change, it should be assessed for its impact on the timeline, budget, and scope.
I agree. It's important that we communicate the consequences of adding new features. If a change would require additional resources or time, we need to make sure the stakeholders understand that.
Right? And if it's a major change, we should document it. We need to make sure that all relevant team members and stakeholders sign off before proceeding. This way, no one can claim they weren't aware of the impact.
For smaller changes, I think we can have a more flexible approach, but we'll need to continuously monitor the impact on the project's progress. If a small change starts to pile up into bigger ones, we need to step in and reevaluate.
I think another critical element is stakeholder management. As we progress, we need to ensure that expectations remain realistic. Are there any tools we can use to better communicate this?
For sure. We can use project management tools like Jira or Asana to track change requests and communicate with stakeholders in real time. That way, everyone stays on the same page and we can ensure the changes don't derail the entire project.
I'll set up a change request form that everyone can submit through these tools. We'll ensure that all requests go through an assessment process with a clear explanation of the impact and why it's being considered.
That sounds great. If there are any urgent changes, we should have a streamlined process for approval, but they need to be exceptions, not the norm.
Absolutely. Let's also have a weekly meeting to review any requested changes and decide whether they should be implemented or rejected. This gives us a chance to keep track of the overall project scope and prevent things from getting out of hand.
We should also make it clear to the client and stakeholders that while we're open to change, we'll make sure their new ideas align with the overall goals of the project.
Great point. Setting clear expectations up front will save us a lot of headaches later on. I'll send out a communication plan and make sure everyone is aligned with the change management process. Now that we've set up a framework for managing changes, let's talk about how we'll monitor progress. How do you envision tracking this project's performance?
We should use key performance indicators, KPIs, to track progress. For example, we can monitor development milestones, design reviews, user testing feedback, and budget tracking. These KPIs will help us assess if we're on track.
Great. We'll also need to use a project management tool to keep everyone accountable for their tasks. That way, we can visualize the overall progress and identify any bottlenecks early on.
Exactly. I recommend setting up daily or weekly stand-ups, where team members can share their progress, discuss any roadblocks, and align on the next steps.
That's a solid approach. I also think we need to conduct regular reviews, maybe at the end of every milestone, so we can reassess the strategy if necessary. For example, if we notice that a certain feature is taking longer than expected, we can adjust our resources accordingly.
I agree. These reviews will also be a good opportunity to check if the project is still aligned with the original scope. If we find that we've deviated from the original goals, we can adjust the direction before it becomes a problem.
What kind of metrics should we track specifically in these reviews? Should we focus more on timelines, budget, or something else?
I think the focus should be on timelines and budget first, but we also need to track quality metrics like how well the product is being received in user testing. That will help us adjust course before we reach the final stages.
That makes sense. I'll set up a dashboard in our project management tool to visualize the KPIs, and we can update it in our weekly reviews. We'll also need to keep an eye on resource allocation to make sure we're not overextending the team.
Definitely. If we see a particular resource being overburdened, we can redistribute tasks or bring in additional support to ensure the project keeps moving smoothly.
One thing I'll mention is that we need to be flexible with our strategies. If a particular approach isn't yielding the desired results, we need to be willing to try something else.
Absolutely. It's all about being adaptive. I think the key is staying open to feedback both from the team and the stakeholders. As long as we remain flexible and proactive, we'll be able to adjust our strategy without derailing the project.
Exactly. We'll schedule regular check-ins with the stakeholders as well. That way, we can incorporate their feedback and ensure we're headed in the right direction. Let's wrap up with post-project evaluation. After this project is complete, we'll need to take a step back and evaluate how everything went. How do you think we should approach this?
I think we should conduct a thorough postmortem to assess the project's success. This means reviewing the entire process, what worked well, what didn't, and what we can improve in future projects.
Agreed. We'll want feedback from all stakeholders, not just the project team. If we can understand what went well from the client's perspective, that will help us improve our processes for the next project.
Definitely. We should ask specific questions. Were the project's goals clear from the beginning? Did we meet the deadlines? Was the budget adhered to? And, of course, did the final product meet their expectations?
Those are great questions. We should also look at the internal team's performance. Did they feel supported? Were there any obstacles that slowed down progress? This will help us understand how to improve team collaboration in the future.
For sure. And we should also look at the quality of the final product. Are there any post-launch issues that need to be addressed? Are there any features that were underutilized or could be improved upon?
Right. A big part of this evaluation will be about learning and continuous improvement. After the postmortem, I think we should create a lessons learned document. We can take that and apply it to future projects.
I love that idea. We could also share this feedback with the broader organization to improve processes across teams. If we find something that really worked well, it could be a model for other projects.
Yes. Let's make sure we document everything thoroughly so we can refer back to it. We'll also want to share the lessons learned with future project managers to help them avoid the same pitfalls.
Once we gather all the feedback, we can set up an action plan to implement changes where needed. This will allow us to continuously improve the way we manage projects.
Exactly. We'll also want to recognize the team's contributions. Acknowledging their hard work is key to maintaining morale and encouraging them for future projects.
Absolutely. Positive reinforcement goes a long way. Let's also make sure we recognize individual achievements, whether it's meeting deadlines or overcoming challenges.
Once the evaluation is complete, we'll schedule a final meeting with a client to go over the deliverables and see if there's anything else they'd like before closing the project.
Right. That final step will ensure that everyone feels satisfied with the outcome. If there's additional feedback or requests, we can address them then or plan for future phases.
Perfect. I'll coordinate the post-mortem meeting and make sure all stakeholders are invited. Let's make sure we capture as much insight as possible to improve the process for the future.